What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to the Cardfight Casual channel, and as you can tell by the title, Singapore's WGP just happened a few days ago. And at the end of the video, stay tuned because there will be a box opening of VEB08, My Glorious Justice, that my friend won at the Kuji, which is like a dice roll lucky draw kind of thing. So if you guys are interested in that, stay tuned to the end. But this is my Messianic Law Blaster deck profile that I went 5-1 with in the tournament. Unfortunately, I didn't get to the top 16, but of course, getting 5-1 with any deck, Messianic Law Blaster, of course, is much harder to get. But his strategy is very useful against, I think, the meta that was currently at WGP in Singapore this year, because the whole idea of this deck is damage denial. Now, going through the deck, I will go through the strategies after this, or alongside the card reviews. But yeah, let's just jump right into it. Of course, we have 4 copies of Messianic Law Blaster. Now, if you don't know what his skill is that when you drive check a blaster unit with blaster in its name, you can call it to an open rearguard circle. And if you have 6 or more units with different blaster names, which means each of the units on the field have to have a different blaster name, Messianic Law Blaster gets plus the power and critical of all of the rearguards, which means that he swings really big, like 60 or 70k, which means your opponent either has the PG or drop lots of hand if they want to guard it. And of course, there's the mind game aspects where if you have just 1 or even 2 open rearguard circles, your opponent will have to think about whether or not to take the damage. Now with this deck, you actually want to play Force 2, because believe it or not, if your opponent has 1 or 0 damage, and you're trying to push them to 6 or 7 damage, or 8 damage or 9 damage, you will need to have sometimes an extra critical, because your opponent might pull a heal trigger in those 5 or 6 damage checks. That's it. It reduces the likelihood of them being able to heal if you have a lot of damage, because they won't be able to heal unless they have more damage than you. So at a certain point in the game, if they've been actually guarding, then they would actually have to have drawn the heal trigger in the last 1 or 2 damage, in the 5th or 6th damage, in order for them to actually survive. That's it. If you do have a Force 2 marker, that makes it so that your Messianic Law Blaster has 7 damage and does a whole lot and pretty much seals the deal if the attack goes through. And of course, it pushes a lot of hand to guard. And the whole idea is that you don't swing with Messianic Law Blast, or you only swing with Messianic Law Blaster to the opponent's face if you have at least 3 blaster units on field and 2 empty rearguard circles, or 1 empty rearguard circle, because you just want to prevent them from getting damage or take 7 damage. And at the same time, you don't want to use your rearguards to swing at the opponent's Vanguard, so you just use it to swing at the opponent's rearguards and reduce their fighting force even more. And to help out with that is this 4 copies of Field Feather Dragon. And this card is really good. It's the card that basically makes the deck work. His skill is that on the rearguard active, you can counterblast 1 and soul blast 3 cards, and for that, and then you draw 4 cards, or however many. You draw as many cards as you have open rearguard circles, and then you call that same number of units to the field. Now, it doesn't specify that you need to call onto the rearguard circles that are open, but you can only draw up to the same number of cards of open rearguard circles. So he's really good, because if you get Messianic Law Blaster on the Vanguard and you call into the rearguard, you get to draw 4 and then call 4. Most of the time, you call blasters and call blaster over this guy, so that immediately Messianic Law Blaster skill is threatening and active. A really good card. And even if you brick and ride him, so long as you get a second Field Feather Dragon on the rear guard, you can use his skill, and hopefully in those top 4 cards you draw onto your Messianic Law Blaster to ride the next turn. And for this turn, you just use this guy on your Vanguard, swing at the rear guard, just to get your 2 cards from your drive checks, and then you swing at as many rear guards as you possibly can, and then you end your turn. So you really don't want to give them any damage, and this is a really effective strategy against the meta that was at WGP. Talk a little bit more about that later. And here we have Exculpate the Blaster. Of course, besides being a blaster, he is a field wipe, which was really good against Murakumo, which was the dominant deck at WGP Singapore this year. If you guys didn't know that, WGP Singapore had top 4 finalists being all Murakumo players. And of course, if you are Murakumo facing a Murakumo, sometimes it is worth it to use Exculpate to try and drop their hand if you know for a fact that the hand is pretty much too small to come back in the next round. But besides that, Exculpate the Blaster allows you to put 2 cards from your hand into the soul after you ride him, and you ride a Blaster Blade following that. And that really allows you to make the most out of your extra field Feather Dragon, because there's no real way to soul charge in this deck besides Exculpate the Blaster. And if you want to use Field Feather Dragon skill more than once, that means you have to have 3 soul. And using a Exculpate the Blaster and then putting those extra Field Feather Dragons also helps you to get rid of those useless grade 3s that you're really not going to use either way. And if you're on Blaster Blade, you can G-assist, hopefully you hit your Masonic Law Blaster and are able to pull off this fantastic combo. But just 2 copies because you don't want those grade 4s to clog up your hand. Now at WGP I actually did bring something different. I played the grade 2 Great Sage Baron, which allows you to counterblast 1 and retire him when he gives plus 5k to a grade 3 or higher unit, which empties out a rearguard circle for your opponent for you to call a blaster into the open rearguard circle. But looking back, it was probably not that great an idea because it increases your Vanguard's critical by 1, and it's not really necessary since Masonic Law Blaster is already swinging with a tremendous amount of power. So instead, I do recommend playing this guy, Taintless Feather Dragon. Now this guy is, he's not super duper amazing. His skill is that on Vanguard and Rearguard, when you call him or ride him, you can counterblast 1 and choose 1 column, call up to 2 units to that column, and then this draw 1 card, and then get plus 5,000 power. Now the thing about this card is you don't really want to call him onto the rearguard unless you are calling over him, and the only reason why you would actually play this guy is if you want to call and Exculpate the Blaster from your hand, because of course as Masonic Law Blaster is a grade 3, you can't call a grade 4 except by superior calling, which includes this guy's skill and of course the Taintless Feather Dragon. Oh sorry, the Filled Feather Dragon. So you can only call Exculpate by these 2 skills or Masonic Law Blaster's own skill, and you want to maximize the chances of you getting all different kinds of blaster units on the field. So if you do have an Exculpate in hand, you really want to call it to a rearguard circle. Next, we're going to go through the grade 2s. Like I said before, I was playing Great Sage Baron, but I do recommend playing this lineup instead. You have 4 copies of Rapier. Of course, you know what she does. When you swing at a Vanguard, your opponent's Vanguard, you get to check the top card. So long as your Vanguard is a Blaster or has a Blaster or Arc Saber in its name, you get to check the top card and put it on the top or the bottom. Now the weird thing about this deck is that, in fact, if you're swinging with Rapier to attack your opponent's Vanguard before your Masonic Law Blaster attacks, first of all, you don't actually want to boost it. So 10k against your opponent's 12k or 13k won't hit, but it will allow you to proc the skill, check the top and put it on the top or the bottom. And believe it or not, if you get a trigger on top, you put it at the bottom, because what you're trying to do is to pressure your opponent with the blasters and not actually to get those extra triggers. Although if you know your opponent has a PG, you can try to mind game them by leaving them on top and then using that to draw an extra card. If it's a draw trigger, heal an extra damage. Of course, if it's a critical trigger, I suggest you put it at the bottom unless you really need the shield. But regardless, she's a really good card, and if your Masonic Law Blaster swings first and whiffs, you can use her to check the top card for a damage trigger that you will take the next turn to make your guarding turn much easier. And she gets plus 15k if there's 6 different blasters on the field, but if there's 6 blasters on the field, you'll be swinging to the rearguard anyway, so it's just a really strong rearguard swing. Now, of course, we play 4 copies of Blaster Blade. Besides being another blaster unit and the style of most Royal Paladin decks, it's also necessary to play him, because if you do right Exculpate the Blaster, you need one of him in soul or in hand. If not, you will lose the game. Now, Blaster Arrow in most cases isn't very good because she just gives resist to your whole field, but it's not really useful when you're facing against things like Gauntlet Buster Dragon, or those units that target the whole column or whole row or even the whole field. But she is another blaster, and you want to play as many copies of her as possible. At WGP I only brought 3 because she's less useful, but looking back I should have brought 4. I played 1 more Baron instead of her because the other sort of plan was to push your opponent 3 damage and then keep on swinging with at least a smaller Masonic Law Blaster with 3 damage. But in the end I realized that having more arrows was much better for trying to get Masonic Law Blaster out. And then of course we're going to the great ones. Going off with the basics first, we have of course 4 Blaster Javelin. He gets plus 2k when boosting if your Vanguard is a Arc Saver or Blaster unit, and if you have 6 or more different types of Blaster on the field, when he boosts an attack, you can bind one of your opponent's front row rearguards. So again, with all the Murakumo players, it's just another way to get rid of another rearguard without them being able to guard, and so that when you swing with the rearguards, if you do get Masonic Law Blaster skill off, the rearguards can take out 3, or basically your rearguard swings will take out 3 of your opponent's rearguards rather than just 2. A really good card, but The more important card by far is this card, Blaster Dagger. So Blaster Dagger skill is very important because he allows your opponent, allows your grade 2s and higher to boost if there are 6 or more blaster units on the field, which makes things like Blaster Arrow, Rapier, Blade, and Exculpate able to boost and make your columns actually big enough to swing. Of course, if you do push them to, let's say, 5 damage, those extra boosts can target the Vanguard, and it's pretty useful. His second skill is that you can bounce him back to hand if your Vanguard with Blaster in its name, Blaster or Arcsaver in its name, hits your opponent's Vanguard. That's really only useful early game because you can call him down behind something else that is attacking your opponent and swing just so that they have to guard more if they want to guard their first attack, which will actually bite them in the butt later on. Or if you want to prevent yourself from giving them 2 damage by giving a critical trigger, you can swing with a field like this and then bounce, give the critical to the rear guard, Blaster Dagger, and when you take the 1 damage, you can bounce the dagger back to hand. And give yourself more guard in the turns to come. Sometimes you will have to throw some blasters earlier game to guard and prevent yourself from taking damage, but that's just par for the course. So of course we play 4 of him. Now I play 1 Gumoris, and Gumoris basically puts a grade 2 unit to the top or the bottom of your deck, which is really useful for setting up Masonic Law Blaster's drive check, and his other skill is that he gets 10k power when he does that. I only play 1 copy of him because you do have to call something over him if you want to have Masonic Law Blaster skill active. So just 1 copy of him. In WGP, I actually brought this card called Lucius. I don't know if you guys know what he does, but when you ride a grade 3, you send him the soul, draw a card, and then call a card. Now he's not bad, but the extra soul that he gives isn't actually that useful. So instead, looking back after WGP, I do recommend you play it 1 copy of Tristan, or if you want, even 2 copies of Tristan over Gumoris, because Tristan's skill allows you to counterblast 1 and get a Blaster Blade, which crucially means 1, he's able to get a specific blaster, so if Blaster Blade is the one that you're missing, you can grab it from your deck, and 2, because he does give you a Blaster Blade in hand, you can always call over Tristan with basically any blaster, including the Blaster Blade that you just drew. And last of all, we have the trigger lineup. So I played 6 draws. Of course, we will have the 4 draw PGs right here. You want to maximize the number of draws while still keeping the guarding value of your triggers high enough to protect against your opponent's attacks. So 4 draws, just to increase hand size from damage checks and such. And I play 6 crit because it's necessary to have the 15k shield. The crit is not very useful unless you get to a point where you can pressure them from 3 damage. Denying them damage from 3 is another strategy. And of course, last of all, 4 copies of Elaine, heal triggers, and 1 copy of Gleim. This is just the only other starter I had. I didn't really want to run Buckle, and it just lets your opponents know that you're going to be playing Royal Paladin when you flip up, and you can trick them thinking they're facing a Gancelot deck, when in actuality they're facing a Masonic Law Blaster deck. So the ideal setup is that you will have the 1 Masonic Law Blaster, call the Feather Dragon, get your 4 cards, call as many blasters as you can, at least 3 or 4, and then swing your opponent's Vanguard. In major matchups like against Luquier, you could give them 1 damage, or as my opponent, one of my friends suggested, you can actually give them 3 damage, and then you take 1 of their Luquier attacks, and then following that, you just prevent them from getting any more damage. And if you have an extra Force 2 marker, you can put a Force 2 marker under your Vanguard once they're at 3 damage, so that when you swing your Vanguard, they will have to guard it. Even if you don't get the blaster, if you do get that 3rd critical trigger, which I do play 6 of, then they will have to take that 3 damage, which will be really detrimental for them. So yeah, I went 5-1 with this deck. Pretty amazing. It was, of course, it had a decent amount of luck involved, but the very key thing is that you do have to table shuffle your deck after every single match, which of course should be a practice regardless of what deck you're playing, because you do need to re-randomize those cards. Just riffle shuffle and mash shuffle and table shuffle as much as you can between every match. That is my advice. And if you guys want to see more videos of this deck and how this deck matches up against other stuff like Murakumo, just let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll try to film a few matches with my friends, one of whom, playing Murakumo, actually made it to top 16 with that Murakumo deck. So if you guys want to see the deck profile of that, let me know in the description down below. And last of all, before I end off the video, I'm just going to show you my box opening, and after that the video will cut. So as always, remember, it's okay to play casual. What's up guys, we're at WGP. Yeah, we're gonna, my friend basically got Kuji. Let's see everybody's face. Woo! Anyways, my friend bought $4 Kuji and won 1 EBO 8 box, so we're gonna open it. You don't want to open it? Okay. Anyways, yes.
Open this one.
I have it open at the side.
Wow, shit. Okay, here we go.
Standing the time for the ad. Slowly open.
10 minutes for
10
ads.
minutes.
Anyways.
You get that ad.
Got YouTube got algorithm one.
Yeah, but
10 minutes you get one.
that's not really how it works. Alright. The most important thing is what's the marker?
Oh, 1 point.
Oh, 1 point. Hey.
赚
already, you know. You can get 1 pack of sleeves. Alright. Starting with the first. Yeah, open as well. Open on camera. Base over. You got this Aqua Hydro Hurricane Dragon. Green shade, that's not bad. SP! 赚 already. $4 for SP. And everything else.
Junk box, by the way. Junk box.
This is just rest. Nightstorm.
$4 for 1 SP.
Time for Glory Maelstrom.
Glory Maelstrom.
XVR ICR.
Yeah,
But it's
not
fine.
possible, not possible.
SP is pretty good already.
Another
Glory Maker.
Is it possible to get SBR?
No.
So next
English players. That's the announcement for the English players.
But there's still a VR.
Yeah, there's still a VR.
Oh, another one.
Regular green shade. Great for building. Especially green shade is always worth it.
Solemn
Glory
standby.
Oh, yeah, that's not bad. I actually need that. I'll buy from you. This
that's
weird dimension police card, which means you open up your box.
It's probably the last card.
It's probably him. Sony.
Is it?
Last pack,
yeah,
yeah.
last pack.
Unless Bushiro cheat you of your... No offense, Bushiro. Glory Maelstrom. Go! So that was I think $50 back for $4.
For this.
So that's right, guys. Come to WGP. Buy Kuji from what shop you buy from? Buy Kuji from Zak Games. Support John and everybody at the shop. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. And as always, remember, it's okay to play casual.